Draft Gambling Act 2005 Operating Licence Conditions Amendment Regulations 2024.
Is it the wish of the committee that these instruments be debated together?
No.
Objection taken. I will now call on the Minister to move the first instrument. Debate on the other instrument will follow. Debate on each instrument can continue for up to an hour and a half. I remind the committee that debate should be confined to the instrument currently being considered. I call the Minister to move the first motion.
I'm grateful, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under you, and I beg to move that the committee has considered the Draft Gambling Act 2005 Operating Licence Conditions Amendment Regulations 2024 and the Draft Gambling Regulations 2025. I would like to begin by referring to my register of financial interest, having taken part in a charity bet in April 2024. 2 decades have passed since the Gambling Act 2005 was introduced. Leading gambling firms operating in this country are now some of the world's most successful companies with cutting-edge technological capabilities and deep insight into customer behaviour. The gambling industry and gambling behaviours has since undergone monumental change, from the smartphone to the huge increases in online gambling. The 2023 Gambling White Paper laid the foundations for what is before us today as we introduce draft regulations on stake limits on online slots, and I believe we will go on later to discuss the statutory gambling levy, which will fund research, prevention and treatment. And so to the first one, the Gambling Act 2005 Operating Licence Conditions Amendment Regulations 24 will introduce statutory maximum stake limits on online slot games of £5 per game cycle for adults aged 25 and over, and £2 per game cycle for young adults aged 18 to 24. Online slots is the highest risk gambling product. They have the highest rate of binge play, the highest average losses of any online product, and are associated with long playing sessions and high levels of use by people experiencing gambling harm. Online slots are also the fastest growing gambling product. The online gambling market is worth around £6.9 billion in gross gambling yield, £3.6 billion of which comes from slots. In the past 5 years, this yield has grown by 61% and growth is not slowing down. However, there are currently no statutory stake limits for online slot games, unlike their land-based counterparts. As slots' popularity grows, so does the risk for vulnerable people. Now is the time to act and stem the growing tide of unaffordable losses for people most at risk of gambling harm. We have designed these stake limits to target those most at risk of harm while ensuring the impact on operators is proportionate. The lowest stake limit for younger adults is an important intervention, as our research has shown that younger people may be at elevated risk of gambling harm. Young adults aged 18 to 24 have the highest problem gambling rates of any age group. This elevated risk of harm is compounded by the lower disposable income of this group and of this average. The industry trade body, the Betting and Gaming Council, welcomed the decision to introduce stake limits. If these regulations are agreed, there will be a transitional period to ensure gambling operators have sufficient time to implement the changes. Operators will have 6 weeks from the day of the instrument is made to implement a £5 stake limit. They will then have a further 6 weeks to implement the £2 stake limit for younger adults. During that time, the £5 limit will apply to all adults. These stake limits build on other rules introduced by the Gambling Commission in 2021 that make online slots safer to play. These requirements slowed the speed of play to a minimum of 2.5 seconds per spin. A raft of rules will reduce play intensity. These include a ban on autoplay features, as well as features which speed up the display of results or can give the illusion of control, such as turbo or slam stops. The evidence shows that these features will increase the risk of harm to customers. I will pause there, as that concludes my comments on the first set.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. The previous Conservative government, having commissioned the Gambling Act review in 2020 and published the white paper in 2023, announced almost a year ago the introduction of a new £2 maximum stake for under 25s playing online, as well as a £5 limit for those over 25. The previous government took this decision following a specific 10-week consultation period in which most respondents agreed with the proposals in the Gambling White Paper to introduce statutory limits for online slot games. This was, as honourable and right honourable members will know, to help counter the specific increased risk of harm and life-changing losses from online slot games that had developed since the introduction of the 2005 Gambling Act. It was also to help level the playing field between land-based operators and those online, as the Minister has acknowledged today. After more than a decade and a half, all sides of the House recognised that the Gambling Act was an analogue in a digital age and reforms were needed. But unlike what the Labour government is announcing today, The reforms proposed by the Conservative government were relatively modest and sought to balance the need to better support those at risk of gambling harms with the safe enjoyment of gambling experienced by millions across the country and a key contributor to the UK economy. And it is on this point that I wish to press the Minister today on this first set of regulations, Mr Chairman, as it does appear that the government is continuing to miss an opportunity to promote growth in the sector and engage in the modernisation of casinos more broadly. I've raised this previously, and in trying to be constructive in opposition, I will do so again now. As the Minister will know, the White Paper set out a number of modest but important modernisation measures for land-based casinos to allow operators to continue delivering a first-class leisure and entertainment experience offered to their customers. This included reforms to the formula of what type and quantity of machines venues could have, as well as allowing sports betting for all casinos, which I know from my own travels is common in other countries. Having met a range of operators from across the country already, it is clear that there is still a desire to invest in these businesses, despite the significant headwinds and operational costs coming from the Chancellor's budget, which is pushing many into the red. So I asked the Minister, are the government planning to reintroduce the draft instrument on casino modernisation, which I understand has already been drafted by the Department before the election? If yes, when can we expect this? And if not, why not? And on the same theme of growth and investment, in light of the Chancellor's rather strange comments that the government will be reaching out to state regulators for ideas of growth, what discussion has her department had with the Gambling Commission around ideas for growth? And lastly, Mr Chairman, can I please ask the Minister, what review mechanism will the government put in place to ensure that these changes to online stakes do not further fuel the growth in the online black market? I know many members will share my concerns. This growth on the gambling black market, which I'm afraid to say I did warn of both before and since taking up this brief. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
I want to make my intervention short because as chairman of the Online Gambling Harms All-Party Parliamentary Group, I want to first of all say what a significant pleasure it is to see under your chairmanship, and great pleasure to be here at this point at last, where the regulations are hopefully going to be brought in. So I welcome the long-awaited establishment of a maximum staking limit for online slots, which all-party parliamentary group on gambling reform, which I chair, has long campaigned for this measure. It has been long overdue, and and whilst we welcome that introduction, the one point I'd like to make about this particular phase is that £5 is simply too high. We have a problem here because we have physical shops on the high street who will be limited on their stakes to £2, and yet we have a £5 limit for online. And the online side of this is going to be rapidly growing and is the greatest attraction for those who get hooked on gambling. Online slots are available any time, can be marketed to every current and potential account holder, and offer unrestricted access to high-speed and addictive products. This was very clear from all the evidence that we gave. So whilst I welcome this move, I want to make it clear that I think this will have to be reviewed very quickly, because I do not think you can have two different stake limits, which will, in the end of the day, punish those in the high street whilst supporting those online, and it's the wrong way round. The facts are clear. Online slots account for more than half of gambling revenues online, and 45% of those that engage with them are classed as either problem gamblers or at risk. National Gambling Treatment Service clients' report of harm by location shows that 38.1% report harm online. So the evidence really about the great harms of online slots gambling are multitude. And I would just therefore suggest to the government, whilst doing the right thing, they get it perfect rather than just doing it. And the truth is it has to be at the same level as the already existing £2. So I would ask the Minister what scope she will build into these regulations to adjust the maximum stake given the risks of a £5 limit, and to review the limit given the clear indication that this is too high. It's a cross-party view of the committee and not mine alone. On the draft gambling levy regulations, again, it is important, I think, it was critical and important feature of the previous government's white paper, and indeed a damning indictment of the gambling industry, that this levy needs...
You stick to the instruments and details.
So, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, you must keep your remarks specific instruments.
Yeah, I've done it.
Okay. It's okay. Can I call Cameron Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. The Liberal Democrats support these regulations. This stake limit will help to address gambling-related harm associated with online slots, which have rapid, repetitive play patterns and high average losses per customer. It reflects a commitment to tackling problem gambling and is a progressive step in the right direction for strengthening our player protection. Combating problem gambling is a topic the Liberal Democrats have campaigned on consistently. It's a serious public health issue, and it's vital we take robust action to mitigate these risks. According to the latest Public Health England report on gambling, approximately 246,000 people are problem gamblers, and 2.2 million are at risk. The introduction of the statutory levy is a welcome step, as are these regulations, but I would urge the government to go further. We urgently need to see action to tackling pervasive gambling advertising and sponsorship. We need to see action on black market gambling, and we need to see gaming products like loot boxes regulated as gambling products to protect children from gambling harms. Fundamentally, we need to see a commitment from government to treat this issue as the public health issue it clearly is. That was the approach that was agreed in the 2023 White Paper, and it is one that must give primacy to protecting the public from gambling harms. My party have also called for the rate of the remote gaming duty to be doubled, and I would urge the government to look carefully at that proposal. It is evident that urgent action is needed, and this is an important step forward. Therefore, the Liberal Democrats are supportive of this measure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under you. Could I take this opportunity to draw attention to a conundrum which exists in respect of my part of the United Kingdom in regard to these matters? Whereas in Northern Ireland, any online company who wishes to advertise needs a licence from the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission nonetheless insist that they should not perform any regulatory function in Northern Ireland. And in consequence, there is no regulatory function for online gambling, which is the growth industry. Now, Northern Ireland is an area where it's been established has more than average problem with gambling. And so we have this situation where you have to apply to the Gambling Commission for a licence if you want to advertise for online gambling, but there is no corresponding control or regulation of online gambling in Northern Ireland. Now, it could be said gambling is a devolved matter, and to that extent it is, but the Northern Ireland Executive has utterly failed to establish any regulatory control. Indeed, their present legislation only allows regulation of terrestrial gambling, not even online gambling. So I do want to take the opportunity to say to the Minister, would she impress upon the Department of Communities in Northern Ireland that they need to get up to speed, they need to bring in regulation which controls online gambling and regulation for terrestrial gambling as well. Because yesterday the Northern Ireland Assembly increased the stakes, but increased the stakes in the vacuum of no regulation, no oversight. And that's something which is untenable.
Minister.
I'm grateful, Chair, and I'm grateful to all the members that have contributed to this debate. Of course, I began my remarks with acknowledging that the White Paper of 2023 under the previous government lays the foundations for what we are discussing today. I'll briefly respond to the points made. So the Shadow Minister made some questions and points around casinos. I'm very aware of the relatively modest changes being asked by the casino sector. The government does support measures outlined in the White Paper, and we will provide an update as soon as possible, and I'm grateful to his questions. I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for Chingford. I know he has been a very doughty campaigner, and he's done a lot of work in this issue, and I appreciate the points he's made, and he's obviously put on record that he believes that £5 is too high. I think it's worth considering that the average stake is 60 pence, that very few actually bet £5, but we know that those that are reaching that higher limit are at a higher risk. So this is based on the White Paper, and this whole SI, and indeed the White Paper as a whole, aims to balance tackling gambling harms with supporting the industry, and that is why we've gone for £2 and £5. I acknowledge the comments from the Liberal Democrat spokesperson around advertising. Of course, we know that we have voluntary sports codes on advertising. That is perhaps something we can touch on in the next SI, which will talk about prevention and research, so we can perhaps discuss that a little bit further. I mean, if with everything in gambling, of course, there is the risk that people go to the black market, and we do not want that to happen, and that is why this is a proportionate and balanced SI. The comments around loot boxes, I am familiar with them. I believe it was Sky News who did an investigation back in December. I stand corrected if I've got my media organisation wrong, but I am aware of the concerns around that. I believe we have got some research that has been commissioned, and we will provide an update in due course, but we are aware of these new novel products, and we do take them into consideration. And I thank the Honourable Member from Northern Ireland for his questions and comments. We do recognise our shared interest and commitment to reducing gambling harm across the whole of the United Kingdom, and we do engage with the Northern Irish Executive when necessary, but if it would be helpful, I will ask the Gambling Minister to write to him on his specific points. I think that might be useful to some of the points that he made. So as outlined in my remarks, we believe that online slot stakes limits are an important and proportionate intervention aimed at people most at risk of gambling-related harm. We think this is a timely regulation as online slot games continue to grow in popularity and gross gambling yield. These limits will bolster existing safer gaming design requirements to ensure that online slot games are safer to play than ever. Now, of course, online slot stakes limits should serve as a maximum stake which customers can choose to stake up to, rather than as a new default which operators can drive customers towards. Operators currently offer stakes from as little as £1 a spin, and we would expect a range of staking options far below the maximum that remain available. A number of questions was also asked in terms of when these will be reviewed. The Secretary of State will review these limits within 5 years. Thank you.
The question is that the committee has considered the Draft Gambling Act 2005 Operation Licence Conditions and Regulations 2024. And many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now move on to the second motion.
The Draft Gambling Levy Regulations 2025.
Minister.
I'm grateful, and it's a pleasure again to serve under your chairship. So today we move on to discuss the proposed draft regulations for a statutory gambling levy. From April this year, all licensed operators will be required to pay an annual levy to the Gambling Commission. The rates at which licensed operators pay the levy are set down in legislations, and licensees are at risk of losing their licence if they do not pay. We are clear that the statutory levy is a key part of our agenda for change. It is crucial to making our vision for the future of research, prevention and treatment of gambling harm a reality. I do recognise the statutory instrument is narrowly focused on the payment of the levy, and that is why our response to the statutory levy consultation published last November presented a fuller picture of the future system and a sense of our ambition. The levy represents a watershed moment, a significant uplift in the investment dedicated to this area, greater government oversight and a renewed commitment to further understanding, tackling and treating gambling harm. The levy is not about change for change's sake. We want to build on the successes of the current system. The significant contribution the gambling industry has made to support research, prevention and treatment since the introduction of the Gambling Act 2005 have been crucial and have allowed an expansion of the support and treatment options available for those in need. But we now need a sustainable and equitable funding system so that all licensed gambling operators are paying a fair share. The levy provides us with an opportunity and the resources to put in place the right projects and services, clear objectives and robust governance. We want a world-leading funding and commissioning system to reduce gambling-related harm. For that, we are mobilising existing expertise and infrastructure to move at pace, working with UK Research and Innovation, NHS England, appropriate bodies in Scotland and Wales, the Gambling Commission and the third sector. We are transforming the current system to deliver better access, outcomes and services for people across our country. Now, as members will know, the government's next steps on prevention were not included in our recent publication. Prevention is crucial for future efforts to reduce gambling harm, but it's also a complex area, and it's right we've taken the time to get this decision right. Developing a comprehensive approach to prevention with the right mix of projects and services is, as I've said, complex. But we expect to publish our decision very soon, and I'm confident that the government will confirm its decision ahead of the debate on these regulations in the other House. For the first time, sustainable ring-fenced funding will be used across Great Britain for vital treatment, as well as to better understand the causes of harm and early intervention to support greater awareness and reduce stigma. Robust government oversight will also ensure that the levy funding is having an impact on the ground. These regulations represent the beginning of a new phase for gambling harm reduction, one where people in our country are better protected and aware of the risks of harmful gambling. The levy is a crucial first step to delivering this, and I look forward to discussing this further. I commend the draft regulations to the committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft gambling levy regulations 2025. Call Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's still a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. But unfortunately, things have changed, and that pleasure does not extend to the gambling regulations we are now discussing. And that is because the Labour government have quite spectacularly managed to take a set of draft regulations which were largely settled and agreed upon after significant engagement by the previous DCMS ministerial team prior to the election, to a position today where there are major concerns across the sector about their impact and unintended consequences. And before I highlight some of these concerns to the House today, and in the spirit of trying to be constructive in opposition again, I urge the government and the minister, who I have a lot of time and respect for, and I know she's covering today, to address a clear structural problem with how they are approaching this important policy area, and this has been highlighted in some of the responses already. Having the gambling minister in the other place, working part-time on major gambling reforms, is clearly not working. Whilst most governments will face criticism, at times of not listening by critics, it is remarkable that in almost every conversation that the Shadow team has with people across the sector, we are being told consistently that the government is not even engaging, let alone listening. So this is a major concern that keeps coming up, and it's a constant theme. So on this point, I think the government have successfully, I must say quite remarkably, managed to unite both the anti-gambling side of the sector and the pro-gambling side of the sector, and everyone in between in their concerns about the lack of engagement. So I would ask, separate to the discussion today, that the Minister takes that away and feeds it back perhaps through the Whips Department, because it is quite a feat. And sadly, it is for this reason, for failing to engage properly, why I believe there are a number of issues with the redrafted regulations in front of us today. Firstly, the broader economic context. Members might have seen the recent Sunday Times tax list 2025, which highlighted what many of us already knew. The gambling industry already pays a lot of tax. In fact, the OBR estimate that in the year 2024 to 2025, betting and gaming duties alone will raise £3.6 billion. This represents roughly 0.3% of all receipts and is equivalent to £124 per household and 0.1% of national income. While the Betting and Gaming Council estimate that its members contribute £6.8 billion to the economy each year, as well as supporting more than 109,000 jobs across the country. So whilst I understand that some might wish to bash the bookies, we must have a sensible debate about the collective impact of Labour's tax rises on the sector, the thousands of jobs across the country now being put at the risk, and the potential unintended consequences for charities, sports such as British horse racing, and the growth of the black market, as I've referenced already. Betting revenues on horse racing are evidently falling because of flawed affordability checks, and the economic backdrop today is fundamentally bleaker because of Labour's budget, which adds to the broader sector concerns as the government seeks to squeeze even more money out of firms. And we all must be clear that these levies being discussed will further push up costs for businesses, severely restricting or even removing the viability of smaller gambling operators and important community assets such as bingo halls and racecourses across the country when Labour's tax rises are taken as a whole. Which brings me, Mr Chairman, on to the next point I wish to highlight, the scope of the amended draft regulations which have been expanded from the previous proposals. There are deep sector concerns about who this Labour government are targeting by expanding the scope of these regulations. For example, Regulation 2 brings into scope trackside betting at greyhound and horse racecourses, while Regulation 3 sets the minimum levy payment threshold, which had previously been agreed at £500,000 a year. However, the government has gone much further, reducing the minimum threshold to only £10 for small operators, after which point they would need to start paying the mandatory levy and doing the administration that goes alongside that. Unsurprisingly, this has caused great alarm amongst independent and smaller firms who are being brought into scope of levy payments for the first time. It has also brought independent bingo hall operators into the scope of the liability for the levy. Under Regulation 4, these businesses will be charged at 0.2%, which I understand is double what had been proposed previously. And if I'm interpreting the proposed regulations correctly in front of us, This would see small independent bookmakers at courses around the country charge double the rate of pooled betting operators such as the Totes. I would appreciate if the Minister can confirm that that understanding is correct on that exact point. Mr Chairman, the Government's new proposals have also lumped independent high street bookmakers in with land-based retail, a land-based retail rate of 0.5%, which is also up from the previous proposal of 0.4%. This means small independent betting shops will be paying an additional £1,000 per shop, an additional £500,000 in total. The Betting and Gaming Council have said that this is a real hammer blow to the 500 small independent bookmakers in the UK, who employ over 2,500 people, but will undoubtedly lead to closures and job losses. And if important community assets such as bingo halls and race courses facing a Labour battering wasn't bad enough, we also have concerns being expressed by community lotteries that they are risking being charged the levy twice because of how it's been drafted, which would negatively impact distributions to good causes. I understand that the Department did consider charging the levy at 0% for society lottery operators, but concluded this would amount to an exemption and would bring significant legal risks. But I must ask the Minister, has a new impact assessment been carried out to analyse these risks and concerns that are being raised in greater detail again today? Because even if some members might be comfortable at bashing the bookies, they can't be comfortable surely with the unintended consequences and risks of less funding for good causes and the loss of jobs and community assets. Which, Mr Chairman, you'll be pleased to know brings me on to my final concerns that I want to focus on today. The potential impact on charities and organisations already doing fantastic work to support those suffering with gambling addictions. As members should already know, the existing voluntary scheme, whilst far from perfect, has seen hundreds of millions of pounds in contributions from gambling firms invested to help fund a network of specialist charities and organisations supporting those who need help. I understand that this network currently cares for roughly 85% of all problem gamblers receiving treatment in Britain, but there are major concerns and great uncertainty about how and to what extent this care can continue as the Government seeks to change from a voluntary to a statutory system. First, the issue of funding in the short term. Our understanding is that the instrument laid before us today will lead to a double levy for some firms to pay this year. Ministers have been clear that they expect the industry to pay voluntary contribution this financial year. Plus, if these regulations come into effect, the industry will also be required to make payments backdated on profits from the 1st of April last year. The Minister must know that if faced with being twice in the same calendar year, many firms in the industry will look to minimise their voluntary payments for this financial year. Moreover, the first levyable period, according to Regulation 4, Section 6, reads that the levy due this October is 33% higher than it would usually be. So not only are the Government asking firms to pay twice in a year, but they have added an extra third onto the statutory levy in the fine print up front. Mr Chairman, this clearly risks millions of pounds in vital funding being removed from the treatment network before October of this year, when the first statutory levy payment is due. When responding, can the Minister please again tell us what risk assessment her department has carried out on this potential drop in voluntary contributions and the funding in the short term, and how many people she believes will lose out on treatment in that time? The new statutory levy also raises many questions and great uncertainty about how this money will be spent and the process behind the decision-making, which has again been fuelled by a lack of engagement by the Government. The Minister might want to get a pen, I see she's got one now. Who in Government will be setting the strategic direction, and who is ultimately accountable for any issues arising with the levy? Is it Ministers in DCMS, Health or the Treasury? Can the Minister please confirm what target percentage will be spent on prevention, treatment and support services, and what percentage the Government expect to be spent on research? And how will the Government ensure that research is not duplicated at the cost of treatment and prevention? How will services be commissioned and value for money ensured? If commissioning will primarily be led by the NHS, what support will be provided to charities to ensure that any future tendering processes do not risk their expertise being lost? Who decides who sits on any advisory boards for the levy? And will the Government ensure all views are being heard rather than just vested interests? Will the Government ensure that charities currently being funded by the voluntary levy are not frozen out of the more anti-gambling by the more anti-gambling parts of the sector? Are the Government looking to expand residential treatment currently provided by excellent charities such as Gordon Moody? Her department has announced that the Gambling Commission will not have carte blanche in terms of this approach, which I know will be a relief to many in the sector. But what does this mean in practice? How will the Government be holding the Commission to account? Mr Chairman, these are all very serious concerns, and I could go on further, which really does highlight the scowl of uncertainty hanging over the sector and sadly the lack of engagement and clarity from the new Labour government today. They are a loose horse with bad form and no jockey to give them strategic direction. On many of these issues, the Government are now asking us to take a leap into the dark, with them comparable to jumping Beecher's Brook blindfolding, knowing that it's odds on that there will be a very painful landing. And I'm afraid, Mr Chairman, that without some meaningful answers today and evidence that a thorough and up-to-date impact assessment has been carried out on all of these issues and changes to the draft regulations, we can't support policies that we know will do further damage to jobs and industry, will put community assets such as bingo halls and racecourses at risk of closure, and will risk harming the very people and charities that the statutory levy is supposed to support. Thank you.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr Chairman, I want to make a very simple point to this. I have to say to my honourable friend, I just don't agree with the position that he has taken on this. We had a number of years debating this with our government at the time, which is why at the end of the day we came to this conclusion and it went into the white paper. All I would say to him, yes, of course there are issues in what is here, but are they worth us trying to block the idea of the statutory levy? And the answer is no. It will be vital for research to understand how many people are affected, how are they affected, what are the extensions of effect on those that have suffered. I have met endless numbers of families that have been ripped apart by early suicides, by problems that they face, by bankruptcies, because unbeknownst to them, they had somebody in the family who was addicted to gambling to the extent that late at night they basically trashed their own family. Now, this is where we are intending to go with this. This was my whole original drive, and it was backed by the evidence found by the all-party parliamentary group on online gambling harms. I understand many of the points that he made. Some of those have been reiterated endlessly by the gambling industry. Can I just say one thing about trusting the gambling industry? I wouldn't place much store on that. They had years to get the voluntary levy right. The good ones contributed. The bad ones did not contribute, or when they did, it was peanuts. The reason for the statutory levy was because it was required, otherwise the money wasn't going to many of those community groups and charities that I have met many, many of, who actually dispersed this money and worked to get this done. So all I would say to him, I hope that Her Majesty's opposition will think very carefully about today, because this is important to get it through. Yeah, it's not without its faults. I recognise there was an increase in the percentage that was raised, which will affect shops, etc., betting shops on the street, who are not the wealthy, massive offenders. We know that. That's where the pressure should come. But my point really that I would want to make is I am in principle supportive of this because of the evidence we found. I want to say one final point, and I really want to press the government on this. Could the government confirm that Gamble Aware will have no role in influencing the future work, framework or shape of the research undertaken by UKRI under the statutory levy? They are far too close to the gambling industry. We need to make sure there is independence from that based on the evidence of the harms that are taken and more evidence that we can gather. So I would urge the government to make sure they are not party to that, and therefore this will be clearly independent.
Minister.
Thank you. I'm grateful. Well, the statutory levy, it's been a useful debate and has previously had cross-party support. I will respond to some of the questions that the Shadow Minister made, and then I will respond to the member for Chingford. I think I'd say to him in his opening point around the Shadow Minister for Gambling sitting in the other place, I think it's rather unkind to refer to her as working part-time. She sits in the other place. And I gently remind the honourable member that the previous government's Foreign Secretary did the same. So I think perhaps we could put the political point scoring to one side. On that point, yeah.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, the point I'm trying to make, I was the PPS for former secretaries. I understand what you're trying to say. The point is that I'm not questioning the kind of motives of the Minister, but the point is that she is tied up, as we all know, on the Football Governance Bill in the Lords, because the government have decided to put the Football Governance Bill through the Lords first. Hence, she can only work part-time on the gambling reforms. That is the feedback we're getting consistently, and that is the challenge I'm trying to make.
Minister.
I don't recognise the logic of that argument. As a minister, he perhaps doesn't, I don't believe he served as a minister, he perhaps doesn't know you obviously have to juggle a number of pieces of legislation, a number of different issues. As I say, the Baroness is committed to being the Minister for Gambling, and she engages with a range of the sector. And as indeed did I when I was the Shadow Gambling Minister, and continue to speak to the sector when appropriate. in terms of the points around the economic picture, I won't take any lessons from the party opposite, given the state that they left the economy in. And now I want to move. And now I want to move on to some of the actual instrument. The actual instrument. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. I thank the Minister for giving way. In the first sentence, she says we should move on from these political points, and then in the second sentence says she should take no lessons on us on how we managed to wreck the economy. So I'd just like if she could reflect on those two sentences, see if they're mutually compatible.
I'll certainly do that. I'd now like to move on to discuss the matter in front of us. And to deal with some of the points that the Honourable Gentleman made. He mentioned more than once the desire to bash the sector. I certainly don't want to do that. I enjoy a trip to the races as much as anyone. I recognise the contribution the betting and gambling industry makes to my own constituency in Barnsley South, and I've visited a number of those outlets across. But this in front of us today is about getting that balance of acknowledging people like to gamble, millions of them regularly, but there is a significant issue and challenge in this country on gambling-related harm. And as the Honourable Member for Chingford pointed out, this has been a long-standing piece of work that has been cross-party, and a number of Honourable Members have done a huge amount of work on it, more than I have, in terms of bringing this together over a number of years. That obviously we had the 2023 white paper, and before us we have the statutory instrument that will introduce the levy. And to just turn to some of the questions that he makes, we've listened very carefully to the arguments made by the land-based sector, and we do understand the higher operating costs. We are keen to work with them, and we are confident that this is evidence-led and this gets the balance right. So some of the specific questions, double payments isn't not the intention, and I believe officials are working to clarify that, and I will certainly write to him. He asked for the breakdown. 20% will go to research, 30% to prevention and 50% to treatment. We of course recognise the role that third sector has played over many years. The points he made on society lotteries. We had a debate in this place on Friday of last week where I had a very brief ability, because we had 4 minutes left, to outline a very brief position for the government, and we have committed to coming back to this place by the summer. We've commissioned independent research on society lotteries. That is due to report by next month, and we will be reporting to the House on that specific point. Now, if we just move on to the Honourable Member for Chingford and Wood Green, and I do once again acknowledge his contribution to this debate and to this work in front of us. I think he's absolutely right that if there are questions, we want to make sure this is the most effective and efficient levy. We want to work with the sector, we want to work with relevant charities to get it right. And like anything new, that may take some time. We don't believe that those challenges are a reason to oppose it, and I appreciate his support and I acknowledge the contribution he's made. In terms of his specific questions to Gamble Aware, we acknowledge the role that industry funding has played in raising awareness previously. We are aiming to build a comprehensive approach to prevention for the first time, and it's a priority to ensure that funding is directed to where it is needed most. And I will write to him on the specific point, and I appreciate his contribution.
The question is that the Commission has considered a draft gambling levy regulation 2025. As many of that opinion say aye?
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No. Aye.
Aye. Division. Are the two whips happy for me to lock the doors? Lock the doors.
Graham Downey.
Aye.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Aye.
Mr Louis French.
Against.
Patrick Hurley.
Aye.
Andy McNay.
Aye.
Jerome Mayhew.
No.
Annalise Midgley.
Aye.
Dr Andrew Murison.
No.
Matthew Patrick.
Aye.
Stephanie Peacock.
Aye.
Belle Rivera Abbey. Joe Robertson.
No.
Elaine Stewart. Cameron Thomas.
Aye.
John Whitby.
Aye.
We The ayes were 11 and the noes were 4, so the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock. Order, order.